Rise of Chandragupta Maurya, from shepherd to emperor. In a world still echoing with the thundering hooves of Alexander's retreating army, a shepherd boy stood watching from a dusty hilltop in ancient Magadha, his mind already turning with possibilities that would reshape the subcontinent. Within 2 decades, this seemingly insignificant youth, Chandragupta Maurya, would build the largest empire India had ever seen, outmaneuver Alexander's most brilliant successors, and transform from a cattle herder into the architect of Asia's first great bureaucratic state. His journey from the pastures to the throne would become more than just another tale of conquest. It would represent one of history's most stunning rises to power, guided by the brilliant and ruthless strategist Chanakya, who saw in this young shepherd the spark of greatness that would forge a nation. The rise of Chandragupta, from shepherd to emperor. The markets of Pataliputra buzzed with whispers about the boy. Some said he had divine blood, others claimed he was born to a clan of peacock tamers, and still others insisted he emerged from the sacred waters of the Ganges itself. But in the dusty outskirts of the great city, far from the perfumed chambers of the Nanda Palace, the reality was far more compelling. Chandragupta was learning to lead an army while herding cattle. His first soldiers were other shepherd boys, wielding sticks as swords and using pebbles to plan mock battles. While the wealthy youth of Pataliputra played with imported Persian trinkets, Chandragupta studied the wolves that threatened his herd. He learned how they coordinated their attacks, how they probed for weakness, and most importantly, how they chose their moment to strike. By age 12, he could organize the local children into formations that would have impressed veteran generals, turning simple games into masterclasses of strategy. It was during one of these mock battles that the exiled scholar Chanakya first spotted him. The brilliant but bitter strategist had been driven from the Nanda court after a public humiliation, and now wandered the countryside nursing dreams of revenge. What caught Chanakya's eye wasn't just the boy's tactical instincts. It was the way other children naturally followed him, the way his voice carried authority beyond his years. Here, amid the grazing cattle and summer dust, stood a raw talent that could reshape an empire. The meeting that followed would alter the course of Indian history. Chanakya approached the boy not as a child, but as a future king. "Tell me," he said, watching Chandragupta marshal his playmates in a complex flanking maneuver. "What would you do if you commanded not just these boys, but 10,000 men?" The young shepherd's answer, now lost to history, reportedly made the great strategist smile for the first time since his banishment. That evening, as the cattle returned to their pens and the other boys headed home, Chanakya made Chandragupta an offer. The scholar would teach him everything he knew: the ancient texts of statecraft, the secrets of warfare, the arts of diplomacy and deception. If the boy would dedicate himself to one goal, the complete and total destruction of the Nanda dynasty. Most children would have fled from such a dangerous proposition. Chandragupta leaned forward and began asking questions about military logistics. Their lessons began in secret during the quiet afternoon hours when the herds grazed peacefully. Chanakya discovered his pupil had already memorized dozens of military formations simply by watching the flights of geese and cranes. The boy could calculate the resources needed for a long campaign by tracking how his cattle consumed grass and water. He had developed his own theories about siege warfare by observing how termites breached the strongest walls. But Chandragupta's greatest gift was his ability to inspire loyalty. By his 14th year, he had organized the region's shepherd boys into a disciplined unit that could mobilize faster than the Nanda's royal guard. They used their knowledge of the landscape to run rings around local officials, staging mock ambushes and melting away into the countryside. What looked like games to distant observers was, in fact, a revolution in rehearsal. As word of the extraordinary shepherd boy spread, agents of the Nanda king began asking questions in the villages. Chanakya knew it was time to disappear. One moonless night, he and his young protege slipped away from Pataliputra, heading north toward the legendary university at Taxila. Behind them, they left graves filled with rumors and a destiny waiting to be seized. Ahead lay years of preparation, the craft of empire building, and the first steps toward a unified India that neither Greek generals nor rival kings could have imagined. The shepherd boy had taken his first steps toward becoming an emperor. The wolves had taught him how to hunt, but Chanakya would teach him how to rule. The rise of Chandragupta, from shepherd to revolutionary leader. The ancient University of Taxila rose from the northwestern plains like a city of dreams, its sandstone towers catching the first rays of dawn. Here, where Persian, Greek, and Indian knowledge flowed together like tributary rivers, Chandragupta found himself surrounded by the sons of kings and merchants. Yet within months, these privileged youth would be following the commands of a shepherd boy from Magadha. Chanakya's first lesson at Taxila was brutal in its simplicity. He arranged for his protege to be humiliated during a public debate, watching as the aristocratic students mocked Chandragupta's rural accent and simple clothes. The boy endured it silently, but that night, instead of finding him dejected, Chanakya discovered him studying pronunciation with a Persian scholar. Within weeks, Chandragupta could switch between 6 regional dialects, turning his outsider status into a chameleon's gift for adaptation. The university's military exercises revealed a commander who thought in ways that defied convention. While other students practiced traditional Sanskrit battle formations, Chandragupta combined Greek phalanx tactics with the fluid mobility of tribal horse archers. His innovations drew the attention of battle-scarred veterans who had fought against Alexander's armies. These grizzled warriors found themselves spending evenings with the young revolutionary, sharing war stories that Chandragupta absorbed like a sponge, mentally cataloging every triumph and disaster for future reference. But it was in the shadow games of politics that Chandragupta truly excelled. He built a network of informants that stretched from the kitchen servants to the meditation halls, learning which students harbored grudges against the Nanda regime, which ones had resources to spare, and most importantly, which ones could be inspired to see beyond the comfortable boundaries of their inherited positions. By the time he gave his second public debate, the same aristocrats who had mocked him sat in respectful silence, already half converted to his vision of a unified subcontinent. Chanakya watched his students' transformation with calculating pride. The shepherd boy's natural talents were being honed into deadly weapons of statecraft. Where once Chandragupta had led children in games of war, he now commanded the loyalty of future governors and generals. His midnight strategy sessions began attracting the brightest minds in Taxila mathematicians who could calculate the precise arc of a siege engine's projectile, economists who understood the hidden levers of trade and taxation, philosophers who had distilled the essence of human motivation into teachable principles. The final test came during the monsoon of his third year. A band of raiders, emboldened by the growing weakness of local rulers, struck the trading caravans that were Taxila's lifeblood. The city's nominal protectors seemed paralyzed, caught between competing claims of authority. Chandragupta saw his opportunity. Within days, he had organized a defensive force from the student body, integrated the local merchants' private guards into his command structure, and launched a series of precision strikes that sent the raiders fleeing into the hills. He returned to find Chanakya waiting in their usual meeting place, a quiet courtyard where jasmine vines climbed the ancient stones. The master strategist held a message scroll from Magadha. The Nanda dynasty's grip was weakening. Regional governors were quietly preparing for civil war. The time for practice was over. That night, Chandragupta addressed his inner circle. These were not the children of his shepherd days, nor merely the privileged students of Taxila. They were now revolutionaries, bound together by a dream of unity that transcended their diverse origins. As he spoke of liberating Magadha from corruption and unifying the subcontinent under just rule, even Chanakya was struck by the transformation. The shepherd boy had become a lion, and his roar would soon shake the foundations of empire. Dawn found the walls of Taxila covered with proclamations. The revolution would begin not with swords, but with words. Not with a single battle, but with 1,000 small subversions. The next phase of Chandragupta's journey would take him back to Magadha, back to the kingdom that had overlooked him, back to claim a destiny that would make Alexander's conquests seem modest by comparison. The strategic overthrow of the Nanda dynasty. Palace guards found the message nailed to the gates of Pataliputra at dawn, a simple cloth banner bearing the symbol of a peacock. By nightfall, the Nanda king had doubled his personal security. His instincts were right, but his timing was fatal. Chandragupta's agents had already been inside the capital for months, walking the streets as merchants, serving in noble houses, and whispering stories of a coming storm. The Nanda dynasty's might appeared absolute. Their treasury held more gold than Alexander had taken from Persia, and their army numbered in the hundreds of thousands. But beneath this glittering surface, Chanakya had identified the fractures. Tax collectors skimmed fortunes while farmers starved. Generals bought their ranks rather than earning them. The royal court had become a theater of flattery, where speaking truth was a death sentence. Chandragupta's first strike came not at the capital, but at the empire's edges. Small bands of raiders, led by veterans he had befriended at Taxila, began hitting tax caravans. The stolen gold never surfaced in markets. Instead, it flowed back to struggling villages in the form of grain and tools. Each raid left behind the peacock banner and whispers of a different kind of ruler, one who would serve the people rather than drain them. The Nanda response proved everything Chanakya had predicted. They sent massive armies to crush what they thought was a mere bandit problem. These forces found themselves chasing shadows while their supply lines mysteriously vanished. Commanders who had grown soft in the capital discovered too late that their maps were outdated, their scouts were compromised, and their own soldiers had been listening to revolutionary ballads sung in camp at night. But the true masterstroke came through the grain markets. Working through a network of merchants loyal to his cause, Chandragupta orchestrated an artificial shortage in the capital. As prices soared, his agents spread word of abundant harvests in rebel-held territories. The mighty walls of Pataliputra meant nothing when the enemy was hunger, and the only food came wrapped in peacock banners. The Nanda king's response was predictably brutal. His troops began seizing grain by force, creating exactly the chaos Chandragupta needed. On a moonless night, as the capital erupted in food riots, elite squads of revolutionaries slipped through the city's water tunnels. They carried with them copies of the treasury's own records, proof of corruption that would turn even the most loyal, noble houses against their king. What followed was not the straightforward battle that historical accounts often depict. The fall of the Nanda dynasty unfolded like a complex game of chess, with pieces moving simultaneously across the entire kingdom. As provincial governors declared independence, they found Chandragupta's supporters already embedded in their courts. As nobles conspired to betray the king, they discovered that the young revolutionary had anticipated their moves and positioned himself to benefit from every possible outcome. The end came not with a glorious charge, but with a quiet dawn. The Nanda king, finding his palace surrounded and his guards mysteriously absent, walked out to meet the shepherd who had outmaneuvered him. History records no words from their encounter, but witnesses describe the fallen monarch's expression as one of puzzled respect. He had been defeated not by a superior army, but by a superior vision. Chandragupta entered the palace not as a conqueror, but as a reformer. His first acts set the tone for a new kind of empire. Corrupt officials were not executed, but forced to work in the fields they had taxed into ruin. The vast royal treasury was audited in public, with every coin accounted for. Ancient traditions were respected, but had to earn their place alongside practical innovations. In the quiet of that first night as emperor, Chandragupta walked the palace battlements with Chanakya. The capital stretched before them, still smoking from the riots, but already beginning to sense the dawn of a new era. Their conversation turned not to celebration, but to logistics. The Nanda Empire had fallen, but unifying India would require more than clever strategies and willing hearts. As if to emphasize the challenge ahead, reports arrived of Greek satraps in the northwest, watching the change of power with predatory interest. The shepherd boy had claimed his throne. Now he would have to prove he deserved it. The strategic empire building of Chandragupta. Dawn meetings in the imperial council chamber became the heartbeat of the new empire. Chandragupta sat cross-legged on a simple mat, surrounded not by fawning courtiers, but by hardened administrators chosen for their competence rather than their ancestry. Together, they forged a system of governance that would influence Asian civilization for millennia. The creation of the imperial spy network showcased Chandragupta's genius for institutional design. Female agents posed as wandering mystics, carrying messages encoded in religious verses. Merchant informants traded intelligence as freely as silk, building a web of information that stretched from the Afghan peaks to the jungles of Bengal. But the masterstroke was the network of seemingly humble bureaucrats, the eyes of the emperor, who monitored everything from grain prices to temple gossip, feeding data into what became the ancient world's most sophisticated intelligence apparatus. Military innovation flowed from practical need rather than theoretical designs. Watching an elephant break free from its handlers gave Chandragupta the idea for his most feared battlefield tactic, the controlled chaos charge, where seemingly berserk war elephants would suddenly wheel in perfect coordination, crushing enemy formations between them. His cavalry adopted the lightning raids of his shepherd days, but now they struck with mathematical precision, each rider knowing exactly how far their horse could gallop before needing rest. But empire building demanded more than military might. Chandragupta's standardization of weights and measures sent trade soaring across the subcontinent. His engineers developed a new road-building technique that survived monsoon floods. Most crucially, he established the world's first formal diplomatic corps, training ambassadors in foreign languages and customs, creating a system of interstate relations that made war the last resort rather than the first instinct. The true test of his administrative genius came during the great drought of his 5th year as emperor. Traditional rulers would have offered prayers and decreased taxes. Chandragupta mobilized his entire bureaucracy like an army. Grain reserves were mapped and redistributed. New wells were dug according to plans drawn up in preparation for exactly such a crisis. When food riots broke out in distant provinces, local officials found themselves following emergency protocols that had been drilled into them during peacetime. The empire didn't just survive the drought, it emerged stronger, bound together by networks of mutual aid and obligation. Yet power extracted its price. The young ruler who had once slept under open skies now lived in a web of security protocols designed by Chanakya. His food tasters employed techniques learned from Alexander's court. His private quarters used acoustic designs from Persian palaces, ensuring no conversation could be overheard. Even his daily rides through the capital followed randomized routes, a precaution that saved his life when assassins struck in the 8th year of his reign. The would-be assassins discovered too late that the paranoid security measures masked an elaborate trap. Their conspiracy had been penetrated months earlier, but Chandragupta allowed it to progress, using it to identify nobles who still dreamed of the old order. The public trials that followed demonstrated the new empire's approach to justice, transparent, methodical, and utterly impartial. Noble birth and vast wealth meant nothing before imperial law. Each challenge to his rule found Chandragupta responding not just with force, but with structural solutions that outlived their immediate cause. Religious tensions led to the creation of the Ministry of Faith, which supported all sects equally while ensuring none gained dangerous temporal power. Border raids prompted not just military responses, but the establishment of subsidized border towns, turning troublesome frontiers into thriving trade zones. The empire's bureaucrats worked to a rhythm set by their emperor's indefatigable pace. During harvest seasons, Chandragupta would appear unannounced in remote provinces, inspecting granaries and hearing local disputes. He staged mock attacks on his own fortresses, using the results to refine defensive protocols. Foreign emissaries found themselves discussing trade agreements with a ruler who knew the current price of grain in their homeland. This was not the empire building of legend and epic, accomplished through singular heroic deeds. This was empire building as science, as craft, as relentless attention to detail. Every victory was analyzed for lessons, every setback turned into policy. The shepherd boy's gift for practical observation, honed by Chanakya's theoretical genius, had created something unprecedented. A state that functioned like a living organism, capable of learning, adapting, and growing stronger with each challenge it faced. The diplomatic revolution of Chandragupta and Seleucus. Seleucus Nicator watched from his command tent as the sun rose over the Indus River, his dreams of eastern conquest about to meet their greatest test. The ablest of Alexander's successors had marched east with an army that seemed invincible. Macedonian phalanxes, Persian cavalry, siege engines that could shatter any fortress. But as his scouts brought reports of the approaching Mauryan force, the Greek general felt an unfamiliar sensation doubt. The clash that followed shattered every convention of ancient warfare. Seleucus deployed his forces in the classic Macedonian style that had conquered 3 continents. Chandragupta responded with formations no Greek had ever seen. War elephants moving with the precision of cavalry, archers who fired from chariots that seemed to dance between the phalanx lines. The Greek general found himself facing an opponent who had studied Alexander's tactics, absorbed their strengths, and engineered specific counters for each one. By midday, the battle had transformed into a series of bewildering encounters. Seleucus would catch glimpses of Chandragupta through the dust and chaos, directing troops with hand signals learned from his shepherd days. The Mauryan emperor had mastered the art of controlled chaos, turning the battlefield into a web of individual duels and small unit actions that negated the Greeks' superior coordination. Every time Seleucus thought he had found a weakness in the Indian line, it would turn out to be a trap. The defining moment came when Seleucus led his elite cavalry in a desperate charge at what appeared to be Chandragupta's position. Too late, he realized he had fallen for a classic shepherd's trick. The real Mauryan force had circled behind him while he chased a decoy. As the sun set, the Greek general found himself surrounded, his legendary army outmaneuvered by tactics that had their origins in protecting cattle from wolves. What followed was not the wholesale slaughter typical of ancient battles. Chandragupta offered terms that transformed a potential disaster into a diplomatic revolution. The marriage alliance he proposed would reshape the politics of Asia. His daughter would wed Seleucus's son, creating a blood bond between the Hellenistic and Mauryan empires. The Greeks would gain a stable eastern frontier and access to India's trade routes. In exchange, Chandragupta would receive 500 war elephants and recognition of his empire's legitimacy in the eyes of the Western world. Seleucus, no fool despite his defeat, recognized he was dealing with a different kind of ruler. The Greek general had expected either a savage barbarian or a decadent Oriental despot. Instead, he found himself negotiating with a sophisticated strategist who saw military victory as merely the opening move in a longer game. Their discussions ranged from military technology to philosophy, creating the foundation for decades of cultural exchange between their civilizations. The treaty they signed went far beyond traditional peace terms. It established trade protocols, diplomatic procedures, and cultural exchange programs that would last generations. Greek artists and scientists began arriving at Pataliputra, while Indian philosophers and mathematicians made their way to Alexandria. The fusion of Greek and Indian military techniques created new forms of warfare that neither side had imagined possible. But perhaps the most profound consequence was invisible to contemporary observers. In those negotiations by the Indus, two great military traditions, the Hellenistic and the Indian, had studied each other at close range and found not enemies, but potential partners. The 500 war elephants became more than just military assets. They were symbols of a new kind of international relationship, one based on mutual respect and shared interest rather than mere force. Chandragupta returned to Pataliputra with more than just a military triumph. He had won something far more valuable: legitimacy on the world stage. The shepherd boy who had once watched Alexander's armies from afar had now defeated and befriended the great conqueror's finest successor. More importantly, he had demonstrated that India could engage with the wider world on its own terms, neither rejecting foreign influences nor being overwhelmed by them. In the quiet of his private garden, sharing wine with Chanakya, Chandragupta could reflect on the symmetry of fate. He had started his journey watching Greek armies march away from India. Now he had sent them away again, not as defeated enemies, but as respected allies. The empire he had built was no longer just a collection of conquered territories. It was becoming a civilization capable of absorbing the best of all worlds while maintaining its own unique character. The Great Unifier, Chandragupta's vision for a unified India. In the steamy ports of the Malabar coast, merchants whispered of strange ships arriving from lands beyond the western seas. In the mountain passes of the Hindu Kush, nomadic traders told tales of a new order spreading across the subcontinent. And in the markets of distant Ceylon, travelers spoke with awe of an empire where a lone woman could safely carry a basket of gold from coast to coast without fear of robbery. Unity, Chandragupta discovered, was not imposed by decree, but grown like a banyan tree, slowly, with roots spreading deep and branches offering shelter to all. His caravans carried more than trade goods. They brought Tamil poetry to Bengali courts, Buddhist philosophy to Bactrian monasteries, and Persian art to Dravidian temples. Each cultural exchange wove another thread in the tapestry of a unified civilization. The emperor's approach to religious diversity became legendary. When sectarian riots threatened peace in Taxila, he arrived not with armies but with an ingenious solution: a grand festival where each faith would showcase its finest teachings through art, music, and public works. The competition to demonstrate spiritual wisdom through practical benevolence transformed potential violence into a celebration of shared humanity. Soon, other cities were requesting their own festivals of faith. Chandragupta's greatest achievement in unification came through India's waterways. His engineers transformed ancient river routes into a sophisticated network of canals, reservoirs, and irrigation systems. Farmers in the Ganges plain found their fields nourished by water from the Himalayas, while coastal ports were linked to inland markets through artificial waterways that defied the monsoon seasons. These waters carried more than cargo. They carried ideas, art, and the dreams of a people discovering their shared destiny. Yet the emperor never forgot his origins. In each province, he established schools where common children could learn the arts of administration alongside the sons of nobles. His talent scouts roamed the countryside, seeking not just military recruits, but gifted artists, inventors, and thinkers from every social stratum. The empire's brightest minds might be found in a potter's workshop or a weaver's cottage, and all were given the chance to rise based on merit rather than birth. The famous incident at the Pearl Fort illustrated his method perfectly. When a powerful coastal Raja refused to acknowledge Mauryan authority, Chandragupta's response surprised everyone. Instead of sending armies, he sent architects, offering to help rebuild the Raja's crumbling fortifications. The resulting construction project became a showcase of Mauryan engineering, with innovations so impressive that neighboring kingdoms began requesting their own defensive consultations. Military conquest had been rendered unnecessary by technical excellence. His diplomatic corps mastered the art of cultural fusion. When negotiating with proud desert chieftains, they dressed and spoke in local styles while demonstrating Mauryan agricultural techniques that could make the desert bloom. Among sophisticated city-states, they shared advances in urban planning that made Mauryan cities the envy of the ancient world. Each diplomatic mission carried not demands for submission, but opportunities for collaboration. The emperor's personal touch remained crucial. He would appear unannounced in remote villages, sharing meals with farmers and listening to local grievances. These visits were no mere gestures. They generated detailed reports that shaped imperial policy. When a drought threatened the southern regions, solutions came not just from the capital, but from techniques Chandragupta had learned from villagers during his travels. As his reign entered its mature phase, the empire began to display an almost organic unity. A new invention in metalworking would spread from workshop to workshop along trade routes established by the emperor's policies. A breakthrough in mathematics would be rapidly shared through the network of imperial universities. The subcontinent was becoming what Chandragupta had envisioned in his shepherd days, not a collection of conquered territories, but a living system of interconnected parts. In the highest mountain passes, travelers found rest houses built to imperial specifications, their doors open to all regardless of origin. In the most remote jungles, tribal healers shared their knowledge with Mauryan physicians, creating new forms of medicine. Even the most fiercely independent regions found themselves gradually drawn into the empire's orbit, not through force, but through the irresistible pull of progress and prosperity. The shepherd who had once dreamed of unifying India had done more than build an empire. He had sparked a cultural renaissance that would influence civilizations far beyond his borders. Every trade ship that left his ports carried not just Indian goods, but Indian ideas, Indian art, Indian ways of thinking about the world. The subcontinent was becoming what it had never been before, a coherent civilization aware of its own uniqueness and power. The journey from power to peace. The emperor's private gardens held a secret. Beyond the meticulously pruned trees and artificial lakes lay a small cottage, identical to those used by common farmers. Here, in pre-dawn darkness, Chandragupta would sometimes slip away from his guards to spend hours working a patch of soil with his own hands. The ruler of history's largest Indian empire found peace in the simple acts of his shepherd youth. Time had carved new lines in his face, each one earned in the forging of an empire. The assassination attempts had left their marks, a slight limp from poisoned arrow, a sword scar hidden beneath royal robes. But the deepest wounds were invisible. In quiet moments, courtiers would catch him staring into space, perhaps seeing again the faces of friends lost in his rise to power, or remembering the weight of decisions that had sent thousands to their deaths. His relationship with his son Bindusara revealed the paradox of his success. The boy had been raised in luxury, educated by the finest minds in Asia, given every advantage Chandragupta had lacked. Yet the emperor increasingly found himself missing the raw hunger, the practical wisdom that came from struggle. Bindusara was brilliant, but he had never needed to learn how wolves think, never experienced the urgent creativity of survival. The breaking point came during the year of the comet. As celestial omens sparked religious fervor across the empire, Chandragupta faced a crisis that tested every lesson of his remarkable life. His oldest friend and mentor, Chanakya, had finally overreached. The spy master's network had grown too powerful, threatening to overshadow the throne itself. The man who had helped a shepherd boy become emperor now posed a danger to the empire's future. Their final conversation lasted a single night. No records exist of what was said, but dawn found Chanakya departing for voluntary exile, leaving behind his posts and powers. Chandragupta had chosen the empire's stability over personal loyalty, but the cost was etched in his eyes. Power demanded sacrifices, and each one carved away another piece of the self. The emperor's transformation began quietly. He started spending more time with Jain monks, discussing questions of karma and the weight of violence. The man who had built an empire through strategic brilliance found himself increasingly drawn to the idea of radical non-violence. His dreams, once filled with visions of unity and glory, now brought images of blood-soaked battlefields and the true cost of ambition. Royal scribes noted subtle changes in policy. Hunting expeditions were cancelled. Animal sacrifices in state ceremonies were replaced with flower offerings. The empire's formidable military remained strong, but its focus shifted increasingly toward defensive preparations and diplomatic solutions. The shepherd who had learned to fight wolves was learning to make peace with them. When the announcement came, it struck like lightning from a clear sky. Chandragupta declared his intention to renounce the throne and become a Jain ascetic. The court erupted in chaos. Foreign ambassadors rushed to send word to their capitals. Bindusara, barely into his 20s, found himself facing the prospect of ruling history's greatest Indian empire. But the emperor's final act of statecraft proved as brilliant as his first. Rather than an abrupt transition, he created a 2-year period of gradual withdrawal. Each day, he surrendered another royal privilege. Each month, he transferred another portion of power to his son. The empire learned to continue without his direct guidance, like a child learning to walk while the parent's steadying hand slowly pulls away. In his last imperial audience, Chandragupta received visitors in a simple white robe, seated on the floor rather than the throne. According to legend, a Greek ambassador asked how a man could give up such power. The emperor smiled and replied with a question. Is it a greater feat to conquer an empire or to conquer oneself? The next morning, the palace awakened to find him gone. The shepherd boy who had become emperor had taken one final step in his extraordinary journey. Somewhere in the southern forests, a new ascetic began his practice, seeking liberation from the very power he had spent a lifetime building. He had given India unity, now he sought to find his own, twilight of an emperor, the final journey of Chandragupta Maurya. The caves of Shravanabelagola held secrets no history book would record. Here, In the silence of southern hills, the man who had commanded armies chose to command only his breath. Local villagers spoke of an ascetic whose meditation remained undisturbed even when lions roamed nearby, not knowing they witnessed the final transformation of history's greatest Indian emperor. Chandragupta's practice of Salikhana, the Jain ritual of voluntary fasting, began as summer heat scorched the hills. The choice of location proved meaningful. From certain caves, one could see both sunrise and sunset, the full arc of existence contained in a single view. This last campaign would be waged not against external enemies, but against the ultimate opponent, human attachment itself. Word of his presence spread through whispers, drawing pilgrims who wished to glimpse the emperor-turned-ascetic. They found not the legendary ruler, but a thin figure with eyes that seemed to look through mountains. Some brought offerings of food or water, not realizing that his fast had progressed beyond such earthly concerns. A few returned to distant courts, with accounts that would become legend tales of a man who had mastered the art of dying as thoroughly as he had mastered the art of rule. The fast followed ancient principles, each day surrendering another connection to physical existence. Those few monks allowed to attend him recorded no words of regret, no longing for lost glory. Instead, his final teachings focused on the nature of power itself, not as something to be grasped, but as an illusion to be transcended. The emperor who had unified India through force of will now worked to dissolve the very self that had accomplished those deeds. As his body weakened, local shepherds reported strange occurrences. Birds nested unusually close to his cave. Normally, territorial animals shared drinking spots peacefully. Perhaps these were mere coincidences, or perhaps the man who had once learned warfare from watching wolves was emanating something that touched the natural world. The monks kept their own counsel, but their written observations hinted phenomena that defied explanation. The end came as the monsoon clouds gathered. According to Jain texts, his final meditation lasted 3 days, his breathing becoming gradually imperceptible. The shepherd boy who had watched an empire's armies pass by, who had built history's greatest Indian state, who had mastered both the arts of rule and renunciation, released his last breath as rain began to fall. News of his death traveled across the subcontinent like ripples on still water. In distant Persian courts, Greek academies, and Chinese imperial archives, scribes recorded the passing of a ruler unlike any other, one who had willingly surrendered absolute power in pursuit of spiritual truth. His final act became as influential as his military conquests, offering later rulers a model of power tempered by principle. Archaeological discoveries centuries later would confirm the sophistication of his empire, but they couldn't capture the full measure of the man. Beneath palace foundations, researchers found evidence of that simple cottage in the royal gardens. Among diplomatic archives, they discovered letters revealing the deep humanity of his governance. Each artifact added another facet to a legacy that transcended mere empire building. Contemporary India bears countless imprints of his vision. The administrative systems he created evolved but never vanished. The principle of unity and diversity that he championed became a cornerstone of Indian civilization. Even his final renunciation prophesied a uniquely Indian understanding of power, not as an end in itself, but as a stage in a longer journey. In the caves where he spent his final days, worn smooth by centuries of pilgrims' feet, modern visitors sometimes pause in unexpected silence. Perhaps they sense something of what the local shepherds witnessed, the presence of a man who had journeyed from watching empires to building one, only to discover that the greatest conquest lay in letting go. The shepherd boy who became an emperor, who transformed an empire into a civilization, who surrendered power for wisdom, had completed his extraordinary arc. In doing so, he left behind not just a unified India, but a new ideal of leadership, one that measured greatness not by what could be gained, but by what could be transcended. The legacy of Chandragupta Maurya, from empire to modern inspiration. Modern archaeologists working at Pataliputra made a stunning discovery in the summer of 2019. Beneath layers of sediment, they uncovered a perfectly preserved seal bearing the Mauryan peacock symbol. But what caught their attention wasn't the artifact itself. It was the fingerprint, still visible in the ancient clay. For the first time in over 2 millennia, humans were looking at the physical touch of Chandragupta Maurya. The emperor's administrative innovations emerged as prophetic. His system of civil service examinations was replicated by Imperial China and later by the British Empire. The organizational structure he developed, dividing authority between central, regional, and local levels while maintaining clear lines of accountability, reads like a blueprint for modern federal governance. Silicon Valley tech companies unknowingly echo his intelligence-gathering methods. Like Chandragupta's network of informants and analysts, modern data-driven organizations process vast amounts of seemingly mundane information to predict and shape social trends. His understanding that power flows from information rather than mere force anticipated our digital age by 2 millennia. In the halls of India's diplomatic service, Chandragupta's influence remains palpable. Modern Indian negotiators still study how he balanced regional autonomy with central authority, how he turned potential enemies into allies through cultural exchange, and how he managed to absorb foreign influences while maintaining cultural sovereignty. His solution to the paradox of globalization, engage with the world while remaining distinctly yourself, speaks directly to the challenges of our interconnected age. Military strategists from West Point to Sandhurst now study his campaigns, particularly his innovative responses to asymmetric warfare. His understanding that cultural and economic power could be more effective than military might has found new relevance in an era of hybrid warfare and global competition. The shepherd's grasp of terrain and timing, scaled up to imperial proportions, offers lessons for modern strategic thinking. But perhaps his most profound legacy lies not in statecraft, but in his final choice. In an age of leaders who cling to power at any cost, Chandragupta's voluntary renunciation offers a radical alternative. His understanding that true leadership includes knowing when to let go has gained new resonance in a world grappling with questions of succession, transition, and the relationship between power and purpose. The discovery of new evidence continues to deepen our understanding. Recent satellite imaging has revealed the full extent of his road network, showing how thoroughly he connected the subcontinent. Genetic studies demonstrate how his policies encouraged population mixing, creating the diverse genetic landscape of modern India. Each discovery adds another dimension to the achievement of a shepherd boy who dared to dream of unity. As India rises again as a global power, Chandragupta's legacy provides both inspiration and challenge. His vision of a civilization that could absorb the best of foreign influences while maintaining its essential character speaks directly to India's modern balancing act between tradition and innovation. His administrative innovations offer templates for managing a diverse continental-scale democracy. The fingerprint in clay reminds us that beyond the legend stood a human being. One who learned strategy from watching wolves, who built an empire through practical observation as much as theoretical knowledge, who ultimately chose spiritual truth over worldly power. In his journey from shepherd to emperor to ascetic, he charted a path that still offers guidance to those who would build not just empires of territory, but empires of the human spirit. Standing in modern Pataliputra, now known as Patna, one can still feel echoes of his vision. The city's mix of ancient ruins and rising skyscrapers, of traditional markets and tech startups, embodies the same balance of continuity and change that Chandragupta mastered. The shepherd boy's dream of a unified, prosperous, culturally confident India remains a living force, still shaping the destiny of 1 billion people.